Hello everybody, this is Mary Catherine at Red Robin Farm, and My Own Little House is the name of my channel. And today is a painting video, and I am working on, hopefully, a new children's book that I'm going to put on my YouTube channel like I've done once before. This, I think, will be a bedtime story, and it's going to be about sleeping animals, sleeping woodland animals. So I'm going to be showing you how I painted these bears. I think this is maybe the fourth or fifth painting in this series, and so let's get started on that, and we'll zip through some of the things that are a little boring, but maybe you'll learn something new about watercolors that you didn't know before. And I just thought you might be interested in this little method of, with a ruler, I drew a frame around the area where I'm going to be painting the animals in the middle. And in that frame, I just sketched some simple leaves. Some have little stems and some don't. They're very, very simple. Some go behind others and some don't. And to sketch them, I used a watercolor pencil, which is lovely because then you can come back with just regular paint, regular water, and with water you can draw that paint out. So I've drawn the paint that was around the edge of those leaves out into the area behind the leaves. And then when that's fully dry, I'll go back and I'll paint the leaves all different colors, all different fall colors. I think that'll be really pretty. The brown is a little pale, but I think it will make the leaves stand out. Then the animals, the woodland animals that I want to paint sleeping in the middle of that frame are two little bear cubs. So that's my goal for this particular woodland theme, and I'll keep on adding to my little book that I'm writing. I'm going to talk us through some of the things that I'm doing here as I start the bears. Now, if you want to see the photo that I used as a guide, if you go to Google Images and type in, I think it's sleeping bear cubs or two sleeping bear cubs, and you scroll down through the images that Google shows you, you'll quickly see the one that I used. I chose a darker bear asleep in the front on his side, and then a lighter colored bear that you see me painting here. He's resting his head on the other bear's back, and they're both asleep. So if you want to see what I'm doing, and I do apologize that the video is upside down. That was just the way I was able to position my tripod so that my right hand was not in the way of you being able to see the painting as I paint. So I'm going in now just with just the undercoat of paint. And I should get my paints out so I can tell you which paints I'm using here. The lighter bear there is in a raw sienna. Now the set I'm using are Mission Gold watercolor tubes, which I really like. And yeah, that's all one color, the raw sienna. And then I moved on. The two colors that I use the most in the darker bear are Van Dyke Brown is the darkest brown, and then Burnt Umber is the other one. And I use primarily Burnt Umber, just in sometimes a very thin wash and sometimes a thicker wash. And this is just the initial shape. I really use the photograph primarily to determine shape and a little bit color. Now I have Leo trying to get on my lap. Leo, no. So, as I've said, I'm not any kind of professional watercolorist, so all of this is a bit experimental, and I'm really not sure how it's going to turn out, which is a little nervous once you've done all that preliminary work. And one thing I'm doing here is trying to just get some of the shading with the color, the darker down below, his leg was quite dark, his hip was rather dark. Even the lighter color bear has some really light shading on the top of his head, and the tip of his ears are just very faint golden. So I wanted to make sure and leave time for that at the top of him. So I left some white at the top. There I've got a little dab of his ear, the bottom bear. Now I did sketch just some features of their faces that may be hard for you to see here, but their noses and their eyes and their mouths, really. Because I've never done bears before. That's not an animal. I've done squirrels quite a bit. I painted Leo a little bit. I did Bobo once, and he was quite bad. Even though he's framed in the living room, it's really a terrible painting. So this is just kind of an initial, can I get the color down? I also wanted to add the pigment while everything was still fairly wet. I don't keep my paintings too wet, but I don't like my watercolors to look like or act like acrylics. I don't want it to be thick. I do like it to be kind of washy. And using the water and pigment combination, especially the water that you add, to get the pigment to spread and bloom the way that you want it to is important. If you look around the darker bear, look around the edge of his head, you can kind of see the bloom there from the moisture, right where I'm working right there. That really, if you do that while it's still damp, it can give you just an initial feeling of fur around the edge, which can be really useful later. Here I'm trying to work the darker fur up toward his face. His face is really light colored. That's one reason I picked this photograph, was that both bears had light color faces, because if you get the pigment too dark, if I'd picked black bears, it would just be really hard to show their facial features, and for children, I wanted them to be able to see that. And I liked the fact that the bears were two different colors. I thought that was fun. I forgot to mention too that yes, I did go in and do all those leaves. I didn't even mention that. Those were quite easy. Anybody could do leaves like that. They're all basically the same shape. Quite simple. In the end, I decided not to give any more leaf definition to them than as they are right there. I kind of like that simple look for a children's book. And yes, I did have to blow dry. Sorry about that. Now I'm going to go back in and work a little more, do a little bit more detail. Their ears are so cute. But in the leaves, I used probably the burnt umber, probably yellow orange, permanent red, and I believe that the leaves might be, they're either hooker's green or they're olive green, one or the other. And then I had a little bit of yellow, permanent yellow deep. I do tend to kind of mix up my paints in my tubes, and it's a little bit of this and that. Oh, and the purple leaves came from a Kuretake set, because I don't really have those purpley berry colored paints in my Mission Gold, but my Kuretake set does. Those are Kuretake pans, and although I don't use them all the time, I do like to have them for some colors. And here I'm trying to fill in, after I blow dried it, trying to fill in the white between the two bears. And my paintbrush is too dry here. It really is. Kind of scraping around. Now we're going to hurry up through painting the background. This is olive green, and I am just filling in all the background behind the bears. It's a very pale green, but it's going to suit my purpose because I've got other things I want to put on top of it. So there's a beginning. Then I decided to have the bears sleeping on pine needles. Now, I love to paint pine needles because they're so easy. This is my #1 paintbrush. It's a very cheap paintbrush, but it is the thinnest one I have. And honestly, I need to get a new one that is very thin like that. But it has survived. I use it for so much stuff. So you just, this is definitely Hooker's green, fairly dark green, because as you draw these little pieces, they lighten up. And it gives you quite a variation in color on the pine needles. That's such an easy technique. Middle line and then little lines off to the side. So I'm not going to take you through all of this. We'll hurry up through more of the pine needles. Now this is one of the most fun things on this painting that I decided to do. In addition to pine needles, I wanted to have acorns. So I just looked up a picture of acorns on Google Photos, and I've done acorns before, but it'd been a while since I'd done them. And they're just so cute with their little caps. And the two colors that I used for my acorns, again, I used raw sienna, and I might have used burnt sienna or red brown. I really wanted kind of a reddy color on the bottom of them. So let me show you how I do these just a little bit. We're going to start with the acorn cap. And I did those little stems so the acorns are going to be hanging off the stem. The picture that I had of the acorns showed them really close to their stems, so that's why I'm putting it so close up there. So here's the cap. You really want to get the edge of the cap quite rounded. It goes beyond the edge of the base of the acorn and kind of tucks back in. Honestly, I think the first acorn was my best acorn. But what I'm doing here is I'm using some water to draw some of the paint back off of that acorn cap because it was too thick. The raw sienna was too thick. And again, when I laid it down, it just felt more like an acrylic. I just don't like that look or feel, so I lifted some of the paint off. With watercolors, your water that you use is just about your best tool after your paintbrush, because water moves watercolor paint around, and you can lighten it, you can lift it back off, you can clean a spot on your paper that you need to clean with clear water. You can do so much with water. You can draw the paint in the direction you want it to move. If you don't put down water, you can keep it from moving in that direction. So there's the first little acorn. I won't show you all the acorns because that would take forever. I think I just do one more. I liked how they cluster several on a little branch. Of all the things in the background, I think maybe the acorns turned out the best. I apologize for the background road noise, just ignore that. It's not very attractive. Now, as I went along, I'm sorry to say my acorns got bigger. That first one was nice and small, and I wish I had paid better attention. That's my lack of training, you see there. So there's my second one. I'm trying to get it nice and rounded on the bottom, not too pointy. So here we'll rush through the rest of these little acorns. But you can still see that I'm lifting paint off now. You can still see kind of how I did them. It's important. I went back and got the little tops of the caps. Kind of come to a point at the top. Now you have to leave a little bit of white in between the two so they don't run together. And the acorns I didn't go back in and fill that in. I just left them. So there's all the acorns. And now I think I'm going to do, now I'm doing the dots. I decided to give a little bit of definition to the acorn tops. And so I put, see those little dots? And I did use different colors. Actually, I used Van Dyke and burnt umber and burnt sienna. I used different colors to try to give it some variation. But they turned out pretty cute. Now I did a terrible thing. In addition to the acorns, I thought it'd be fun to have some oak leaves, of course, to go with them. And I really didn't study out the shape of an oak leaf very well. I looked at a picture. I think it was the picture with the acorns. I thought, oh, I can do that. It's a mistake as a painter, especially an amateur, to think that you can just assume you can do something you haven't done very well before. I can do leaves. I can do oak leaves, but I have to really think about it and study them because it doesn't come naturally. And they turned out awful. That one was quite ugly, even though I put a little bit of green in there too, trying to make it look like it was turning color. So I thought, well, if one is very ugly, let's just go ahead and do a second one too. And so I tried a second one, trying to lay it behind the little twig and behind the acorns, which makes it even harder because you're only giving a partial shape. It's very difficult to show the shape of the leaf behind something else. That actually, I don't think the acorns are still wet at this point. I think they had dried. But anyway, that leaf looks even less like a leaf. It was quite distressing. And so I decided I would add a little orange to it, see if I can make it look more like an autumn leaf. There are times when you're painting that things get worse and worse, and you should stop. But oh my goodness, it's hard to stop. So if you have two ugly leaves, what's better than doing a third ugly leaf? And that's exactly what I did, because of course, if you're a painter, you want things in odd numbers. So I did an orange leaf, and this thing really looked more like a goldfish, doesn't it? It really does. I'm going to put some brown with it to try to tone down the orange, and use a little water here to try to blend it in. Look at that. It's just as ugly as can be. There it is in all its glory. I did go back later and draw some more pine needles over top of it to cover it up. Oh goodness, it was bad. All right, so in order to calm myself from my bad leaf situation, I went back in to work on the bears more. Now this is going to be a long segment, and if you've had enough of painting, this might be the time to quietly click, and go away, because this next section, working on the bears, the detail is quite long, like 15 minutes or something. So here I'm going to go back and work on this bear's nose, and I'm using that darker Van Dyke brown, I think, pretty sure. And all of this is very fiddly because you want definition, but you don't want harsh definition. So you have to lay some paint down, and then you have to get some water and kind of tone it down. Now here I'm putting his mouth, a little bit of mouth in there. And I have to proceed very cautiously because I'm not a professional. And so I have a little bit of skill. I have just enough skill to get myself in trouble. And so I'm working hard to use the skills I do have and avoid pitfalls that I've made in the past. But I do find watercolors pretty forgiving. I know people think that's silly. They think they're unpredictable and very unforgiving. But the fact is that you can make a mistake and you can use clear water to go back and scrub it out. Scrubbing is what most people call when you go back with your brush, with a clean brush, and you work on some paint to remove it or tone it down. So here I'm putting in his little eye. Their eyes are closed, so it's just a little, that's not black, that's again the Van Dyke brown, that nice dark brown. I did use some black in here. Later I use it for some of the fur on the darker bear, especially around his hip. And I did use some black later to do the nostril holes on their noses because I needed something that was darker even than Van Dyke, so I had to use the black, which is ivory black. Now here I've put his eye in there, and I'm bringing, this is my #1 brush, the smallest brush I have. I'm using a little clear water to try to spread it out a little bit, but not toward his nose, not toward the bridge of his nose. And now we'll do his other eye, which is a little darker because it's kind of in the shadow of his nose. I'm trying to add a little bit more definition. The paint spreads, and then you need a little bit more definition, then it spreads again, and sometimes you get yourself into a real mess doing that. You end up with too much pigment. So I tend to stop and look at it, and I'll look at the photograph to see if I've gone awry, and I'll look at what I've done and ask myself, do I need to stop? Often if you ruin a painting, oh, it's never because you didn't go far enough. It's usually because you went too far. Here I'm also trying to use some clear water to get that eye to spread toward his cheek. Now this is a lesson. I dropped just 1 drop of clear water on the paper by accident, and it dropped on his nose, which was very unfortunate. So I used a Kleenex, a tissue, to absorb the water very carefully. You don't want to spread it, so you can't touch the paper. You just try to get the water to draw into the Kleenex, take it away, and then you have to let it dry. Now I'm going to go in and try to, again, I'm using a clean brush to move some of the paint down that had spread with that water droplet. And then later when it's dry, I can go back in and redefine his nose. So if you know what you're doing, you can compensate. That was a little bit of blow dry again. You can compensate for mistakes in watercolor as long as you don't panic and start slapping your brush on there. You don't usually fix it by adding more pigment. You use it by carefully removing pigment if you've made a mistake. So there's his ear. It's a little dark, but I'll go back in and spread that out. And as you'll see later, I add a lot more color to his face. Really, right now, he just has his base color. But I'm trying to smooth out the edge of his ear. And there's his other ear. It is so important. I keep 2 things of water. I keep one to clean up my dirty brush. See, now this is dry. I've gone back in to fix his nose. But you keep one that's kind of dirty water to clean your dirty brush, and then you keep a clean water that you dip your brush into afterward to get it moist, or if you need a little bit of clean water. Now I'm going to go back in and redefine his eye a little bit. Excuse me. Right now he looks like he's wearing spectacles because the pigment that I drew away from his eye the first time is kind of sitting there with a ring around it. I wasn't pleased with that. Now I'm moving on to the other bear. And again, I'm starting with his nose. It may have been difficult so far to see where his face was, but that's going to be his little brown nose. I'm studying the picture, and there's his mouth. You try to get it dark enough, and then you add water to soften it. And it's kind of a back and forth process. So now I'm trying to soften his mouth a little bit. Now, not everybody paints, especially for children's books. They don't sometimes they leave things very, very defined. They wouldn't necessarily soften something like a mouth or a nose or fur. And that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. This is just my personal style, I suppose. I don't think of myself as having a style, but people tell me I do. These are the places where you spend a lot of time, though, but I think it pays off in the end because you end up with good features. And now I'm doing his eye. You can see kind of the line of his nose coming up, and there's his eye. And now I'm softening the eye. And now I'm scrubbing away that little bit of paint there on the bridge of his nose that I didn't like. Just with some clear water. Scrubbing like that is such a useful technique. Something you don't do in any other medium, I don't think. Now this is where his claws, the end of his paw is, and I had it white there. I didn't want to get rid of it altogether, but I did want to make it a little, not quite so white. Now I'm going back in. At this point, this is Sunday afternoon. I shouldn't have been painting in the afternoon when I'm more tired, but I was. And I had made some mistakes on his tummy right around there. Put in some dark stuff there that didn't work. Here I'm extending his leg and his hip up. I also put some darker shading along his rump. Now I'm using, I think that might even be black. I'm not sure. It's pretty dark. And I really struggled, as I'll mention at some point, with his hip. But again, I'm just beginning with all this color shading. So he's not quite there yet. Now I'm going to work around his face also as we get to the end of this section. I'm not really doing the fur yet. That's a different technique, as we'll see, but I'm just adding some darker areas around his face, coming up closer to his mouth. And now I'm going to go around the edge of the bears now that they're dry and fill in the little white spaces of green with green, so that there's not a white line around them. Again, that's olive green, just a real thin wash of it. Okay, now I'm going to darken this bear's face a bit. Go back and work with the color. So I realized that even though the top of his head is supposed to be rather pale because the light is shining on the top of his head, the little bit of light there is, maybe moonlight, the rest of his face really needed much more color. So over time I added more to it. But they're really starting to look like something now. I put in that color and then I use clear water to just see how that mellowed it out and softened the edge. That is probably one of the most useful techniques to practice in watercolor. Now the red is going to be his little tongue is sticking out of his mouth. So I put some permanent red on there, and I was like, oh boy, that's too red. So then I went back in and just gently pulled some of it off with a wet brush. Then later on I'm going to go and add just a little bit more. You want to be able to see it. I think children would enjoy seeing his tongue sticking out. Now I'm darkening up his nose with some ebony black. No, I'm sorry, ivory black. And his nose also. I think, oh yeah, I'm adding the little nostril holes is what I'm doing there. Those are very important on a bear. Again, this is Sunday afternoon and I'm probably tired and ready to be done for the day. And I kept fiddling with him for a bit. So there it is. I was going to take you through the last stage of this painting, which is putting the fur on, which I've never really done a lot of before, and I had to look up a YouTube video, and if I still can find it, I'll put an iCard up there, of a lovely watercolor lady who does lots of animals, and she had 5 different methods. I mostly just use the short strokes of wet paint on dry, because I already had my background colors, and so I just added lots and lots, literally hundreds of little teeny strokes in different colors. 3 different darker browns down here, really only 1 color on the top bear, because I didn't want too much up there since he was lighter colored. Here are the bears in their finished state. I did ponder doing more definition in the leaves, but I think I like them the way they are. I really don't like these leaves. I did 1, 2, 3 oak leaves, and they were turning out so bad I just stopped. I also really didn't like the look of the bear's hip, and I did use a photograph I found on Google Images to help me with the bears a lot, but and I had placed the hip in the right way, but I just need to soften it and give some more fur definition. So I did a little bit more work on that hip, and I think it helped a lot. I really like his face, and I really like his face. And the rest of it's just fine. So we will add this to the collection, and we will keep going. I don't know what animals I'm going to do next. I'll have to think about it. Well, I hope you liked that, and we'll be doing some more of these woodland animals. Thanks. Bye-bye.